On this episode of the podcast, I have with me Ameya Brid. He is a global director of data and analytics at Invista. We're going to be talking about GenAI conversations and its maturation. What I mean by that is, well, obviously, we're still looking at possible solutions. We're still looking at finding those nuggets that scale across the enterprise. But the conversation isn't new. So we're going to find out how those conversations look now that we've had some experience, have run some POCs. And we're going to talk about some of the obstacles, some of the change management, and we'll see how much more we can get in with Ameya. Thank you for being on the show, Ameya.
Thank you for having me, Amir.
Absolutely. All right. Before we start, can you tell everyone what Invista does?
Yes, absolutely. Invista is a subsidiary of Koch Industries. It's been that way since 2004. And we are a global manufacturer specializing in chemical intermediates, polymers, fibers. Long story short, a lot of our products are pivotal in the nylon and polypropylene value chains. You'll find them in automotive parts. You'll find products in medical equipment, airbags, food packaging, carpets, clothing, you name it. So that's the short version anyway.
All right. I love it. Okay. So we're going to be talking about obviously not Gen AI itself, but really the conversations around it, and obviously how it's matured, right? Because I think originally when the conversations around Gen AI started, everyone was all excited about trying to dive in and figure things out. People now have some experience. They've had taste of maybe the good or the bad or everything in between. And maybe let's start there. Kind of jump us from 2 years ago when people start hearing, listening and hearing about the Gen AI impact to now. How have the conversations changed within your sphere?
Yeah, and good question. I think a lot of if you think about 18 months ago when we were still relatively fresh and new in this space, there was a lot of hype around Gen AI. And what has changed since is people are starting to ask the right questions around what's the real world value and the real world value capture from these efforts, from these experiments. Unfortunately, that still remains an elusive sort of goal or the holy grail for a lot of organizations, for a lot of companies. And in my opinion, and my observation, where people are going, where companies are going, is they're looking to move out of that experimentation phase that we were in about 18, 20 months ago, and into scalable products, scalable GenAI products.
When you're looking at the conversation of trying to find scalable GenAI products, and I get it, because obviously originally everyone was gravitating towards low-hanging fruit, right? And the low-hanging fruit for a lot of places was a lot of chatbot, a lot of conversational things, and then people started realizing, well, how do I get bigger returns? It's an expensive investment. When you starting to look at that from that perspective, trying to understand your stakeholders and trying to understand how much value a larger maybe project or larger initiative could have, what kind of falls onto your plate, right? Because obviously you're spearheading a lot of this, you're helping deliver some of this, and you've got to be instrumental within this conversation. But obviously, you also know what the capabilities are, even if the business might have other, goals or intentions from just business success criteria.
I think it's marrying the two things that you talked about is where the solve is. And I don't want to make it absolute by any means, but I feel like working with stakeholders, identifying those use cases where we can augment workflows with measurable outcomes. For example, it could be customer service chatbots, it could be contract generation, it could be marketing content, it could be improving the lives of the operators. It's helping them think through what the end use case is, and more importantly, the outcomes they should be looking at to truly realize the value from these investments. As you rightly mentioned, these are not, I should say, these are expensive resources, both in terms of time, effort, skills that we are investing in this fairly new space. And it's getting them to understand that, but then also tying it and marrying it with outcomes, measurable outcomes at that, of these initiatives is where I feel like the rubber meets the road. And as an IT leader, as a data leader, as a AI leader, if you will, it is imperative that we do that with our stakeholders who may or may not connect with the cost side of things.
Have we at this point seen enough of what this quote unquote enterprise scale Gen AI solution, have we seen enough of what is required to know what the real challenges are? And the reason I ask that is, you know, picking a potentially narrower solution, okay, there'll be a lot of value. The goal of trying to find something that cuts across the enterprise, which is, what everyone is ideally chasing in enterprise technology, is, do we know enough at this point of where those obstacles are, the challenges that we might actually have in achieving something like that?
I feel so. Again, in the context of Gen AI applications, right? I feel like there are maybe 5 or 6 things that come to my mind. Let's start with the one that we just covered, right? It's the clear business use case, or I should say the lack thereof. That's a big gap. I mean, as I mentioned earlier, many efforts still do begin with experimentation, and they are not necessarily tied to any measurable KPIs. So the progress stalls and it ends up being an endless experiment. So the solve for that, in my opinion, is tying it to real outcomes, real pain points, reducing manual effort, enhancing personalization, accelerating product development. These are things that we should be tying them to. The second thing that comes to my mind is, and this should have been the first thing actually that I mentioned, is data quality and fragmentation. AI, and specifically Gen AI, is only as effective and hinges on the high quality contextual data that we supply it. Companies haven't yet gotten past the challenges of poor metadata, siloed systems, lack of curated data sets. All of these are essential for the fine-tuning of these Gen AI applications, right? So addressing that gap, either as its own separate effort or as part of the Gen AI effort, building effort, is going to be important. The third is a skills gap and talent constraints. There's a lot of new talent coming in, and we see that every day. There's a lot of hype around it. There's a lot of what we call newer roles being created around AI engineering and prompt engineering and domain-specific AI translators. So there's a whole bunch of these newer skill sets that are entering the market. But the keyword there is entering, and don't have a mature sort of workforce in that sense. So what is happening now is our traditional IT and analytics teams, who may not necessarily have the Gen AI literacy that this requires or demands, or the tooling familiarity that this requires or demands, is kind of trying to solve that problem, which may not be a bad or wrong thing. It's just that's just causing it to take that much extra time for us to realize value. The last couple of things that come to mind, one around IP risks, governance concerns. We're still working through regulations, right? As companies and countries and governments, we are still sort of working through regulations. What are the risks associated? Trying to understand what are the risks associated with hallucinations. What happens when a model output is not explainable? So organizations typically stall due to that uncertainty and struggle with the responsible use of AI. So there's that. And then last but not the least is the change management. Unclear operating models are a big sort of contributor to this. There's the obvious, right? There's the fear of disruption, job disruption, lack of sponsorship, which slows progress. But it's really the fear of the unknown, I feel like, is a big component of why we are kind of seeing slow growth in this space, or seeing slow scalability in this space. Sorry, that ended up being a little long-winded.
No, fantastic insights. I actually want to go back and maybe dig into a couple of these. So, I interview some startups that are developing technologies in space, some larger companies that are developing AI technologies. They have some interesting challenges because they're looking at a roadmap of we can only look 3 to 6 months out because models are changing, dynamics are changing, technologies are changing. It's that quick. The one thing that I did work in enterprise IT for most of my career, and the one thing I do know is that they are not known for enjoying bleeding edge technology. They tend to, depending on the company, I'm generalizing, so I don't hope I piss off anyone in totality, but it's true. Enterprise IT is not going to go grab the latest thing off the open source and implement it. It's too much risk. There's a lot of different concerns there. We can dive into those. We could even argue, we actually were talking about, as an episode, we were mentioning that digital transformation is still being worked through by some legacy companies, still happening, like even though we've had the cloud now for a very long time. And then we come to Gen AI and the thought that all these companies would jump forward and just embrace this technology and just implement it, even though there's so many moving parts underneath the hood that even if you did, you'd have to be very nimble at adopting those changes. That doesn't seem very much in line with the way most enterprise tech is run, right? I don't see it that way. I could be wrong, but I don't see that being the ideal scenario. When you look at some of those challenges, and you just ran through 4 or 5 for us, the speed at which things are changing, is that potentially a looming concern for you as like a data leader of implementing these technologies? Because if the models are changing that quickly, your team has to stay up potentially with those impacts and those downstream changes.
I feel like the short answer is yes. It is so fresh and new and that there's so much input from the larger population in this space that it kind of limits your. It's ironic, right? On one side of the equation, it kind of limits your horizon to, as you mentioned, I can only decide 3 to 6 months out. Yet it's so vast in the abilities that it brings to the table. So it's a bit ironic in that sense. But I think at the end of the day, what we've seen or we've adopted anyway is the use of modular composable architectures.
Mm-hmm.
Right? So it's how do we leverage APIs? How do we use LLM wrappers? How do we use RAGs to sort of create, as I mentioned, a composable architecture that gives us that flexibility to plug in and plug out individual components of the architecture. And although that's not full risk mitigation, at least it gives you the ability to, when something better does come along, you're not tied to a singular platform, if you will. You're not tied to a monolith, if you will. You are able to sort of remove and replace that specific component. That is sort of now a better alternative than we had yesterday and the day before, and so on and so forth. Because again, the different components that we talk about, they themselves are at a different level of maturity and are maturing at different paces. So you might have a better base stack or base cloud application, and that's maturing at a different pace than your LLM provider. So, as long as we can keep our solutions modular, as long as we can keep our architectures composable, that's one way to mitigate some of the risk.
No, I love that. And that's exactly. I mean, people I'm speaking to, that is the approach. And I think what you just articulated is a shift. I mean, I think it's a lot of what we've seen over the years. I guess when you're looking at your challenges, and I understand you're going to build modular solution architecture. We're going to be able to switch out. We're going to be able to have some flexibility. All that sounds very good. When you're looking at taking advantage of the solutions, the company's business problems, and as you alluded to, some of the issues with the data, do you end up running into barriers of data quality where you're like, it's not something we can deliver? It'd be nice, but at this time we can't. Do you have to find smaller, narrower opportunities because of data issues, or what does data quality impact in terms of the solution that you can potentially deliver?
If I were to draw a pie chart of what of the different elements that impact GenAI building and application building and scaling, I would say the biggest piece of the pie would be data quality, having a good data foundation. We've seen the challenges that come with the hallucinations that come with bad data quality, the siloed solutioning that comes with poor metadata and the lack of curated data sets, and those that don't necessarily have rather the ownership that it needs to keep it curated, to keep it fresh, to keep it right, to keep it accurate, all of that good stuff. So I feel like, as I mentioned previously, right, my suggestion is we either do that as a precursor to beginning a GenAI effort, or as part of that effort, as step one, is to invest in certainly, but build high quality, labeled, governed, curated data sets. Building these enterprise-wide data products that feed the GenAI models or the applications that we talked about will ultimately help to keep them clean, help to give them the right contextual inputs, and ultimately get the right outcomes that we are looking for. So if anything, invest in data quality and data governance.
The question that's been on my mind for quite a while, and it's a hard one because I don't think there's a good answer, and I don't think any CFO wants to be asked this question. But I guess as data professionals, we always have a short-term, long-term solution in play. Right? This is every data professional I've ever talked to, even stretching 30 years back. There's always that let me put the short-term plan and I have a long-term plan I'm working at. The long-term plan is where it's the nitty-gritty cost of data quality, governance, all those things that in the end are just a lot of line item budget stuff that'll get cut out. We've been cutting it out for 30 years. That's why we have poor data. I mean, there's reasons, right? I mean, is Gen AI, and I've asked this question, I want to hear your opinion. Is Gen AI important enough for the people that allocate budget to go, you know what, we do have to address data quality, or at least moving forward, if we want to leverage even smaller solutions departmentally, we need cleaner data, better data. And I know there's some solutions that you don't need perfect data, but there are things that need to be managed, as you said, in the data. Do you think we're going to have those budgets allocated because of the technology impacts?
I don't think so. I mean, the right CFOs and our CFO is certainly asking the right question, and they are committed to investing in data quality programs, right? Data governance programs. Let me give you a different perspective. What happens if we don't?
Absolutely.
The cost of not investing in that, obviously, as you mentioned it, over the last 30 years, we've been talking about it, and it, to a great degree, hasn't materialized. But the cost of having bad data today is a lot more than the cost of having bad data 10, 15, 20, 30 years ago, right? And the cost is not just at the end of the line in terms of the final decision making. It's in the process itself, right? So knowing that you have bad data, the amount of time, effort, energy that gets spent in cleansing it, and the repeated amount of time, effort, energy that gets spent in repeated cleansing of it is the real cost. That is our alternative if we don't invest in data quality programs, in data observability programs, in data governance programs upfront. So it's got to a point where it's finally now more important than ever in the past to invest in these. And I feel like CFOs, the good ones anyway, the better ones anyway, I should say, are seeing that and are seeing they're doing the alternative analysis and realizing that the alternatives are not as lucrative, are not as profitable anyway.
Yeah, I agree with you 100%. I actually see the shift. I speak to a fair amount of people in leadership roles, and I can hear the different conversations versus 10 years ago and their views on data and how important it is. I mean, obviously, Gen AI has that material impact, right? You could actually see that impact in your org if you can't take advantage of it. I guess maybe to kind of bring some of this full circle. When it comes to change management and talking to stakeholders about, here is a solution and here's how it's going to tangibly alter their workflow. And the reason I like change management within AI is because before getting change management was like, can you please use the report, right? Or can you use the dashboard? That was the change management. Can you actually take a look at it? Because that's adoption, right? If you're reading the report. Now, sometimes we're talking about changing the workflow a little bit, bringing a human in the loop and leveraging insights that previously we didn't have. What are you seeing when it comes to some of this change management out there?
It's no different than, traditionally when we said use this report, and people went, okay, that's I may or may not use it. I'm going to go build my own. So what you do to get ahead. So my point is, if you give them an app that the IT team has built or the GenAI team has built and expect them to adopt, it's not going to happen. It's how can we help them sort of stay as the human in the loop, right? Because we know GenAI applications are going to hallucinate as much as you invest in the clean data, as much as you invest in the things leading up to the final application. We are going to need a human in the loop to actually make the decisions. Agents are changing that to a certain degree, but even then, we are going to need the human in the loop to make the decisions for us. I feel like that's where the change management side is slightly different in this case, because what it does is, in the case of GenAI applications, it's slightly different because it's now no longer a separate thing. As long as you can make it a part of my workflow. If I take the example of an operator out in the field, if I can make my predictive insights and prescriptive insights part of their regular workflow, then I have a better chance, and make them the human in that loop.
Mm-hmm.
I have a better chance of getting to the outcome and the change management aspect of things than saying, here's a GenAI application, go use it and make your life better. I think it will.
I love it. I really do think that some of what we are seeing, I think we're still early. Like, I think a lot of this stuff, if we were to go back and unpack some of the other technology shifts that have happened that have maybe brought less visibility, I think we'd be seeing very similar early day results. And I'm sure, we could pick a lot of technology shifts. I don't think this is too different. I think this is getting a lot of conversation because the business impact is maybe bigger than, oh, we're going to go to the cloud. And the business stakeholder was like, why do I care going to the cloud? That's good for you, not for me. Until they realize they can use, apps different. Anyways, but I do think it's interesting because I think this is a use case where the business impact from a technology perspective is big enough to have drawn this type of attention. I guess before I let you go, when you're thinking about your team and you mentioned skills are hard, these are challenging, challenging market, bringing people in that actually understand these things. When you're looking at your team and you think about upskilling to take advantage of the ever evolving solutions within GenAI, how do you tackle that? How does your team tackle that?
That's an interesting question, and I don't know if I have a singular answer for it. A lot of the naturally curious team members are going out and doing their own research, understanding what's out there and bringing it back to the team. So it's more of an environment of shared learning versus here's a textbook, not literally, but you get the point, right? Here's a textbook, or here's a classroom, and here's a course that you can go attend, and then you'll be the GenAI guru in the environment. So a lot of this is, and naturally so, given the nature of the technology, given the nature of the maturity and the pace at which it is maturing, changing, a lot of this is people going out and learning by doing, learning by seeing, learning by hearing. That's what's happening, at least within our circles currently. what we're trying to do is sort of get a lot of that knowledge and consolidate it, document it to a certain degree, create some best practices. We talked about composable architectures previously. We are also, so ironically, doing the GenAI work as part of this effort, where as the knowledge comes back in, we are trying to create some kind of virtual SMEs for us to be able to tap into in the future.
No, 100%. I mean, I think that's one of the ways that I think I am seeing a lot of people tackle it is just roll up your sleeve. So that seems to fit. I think the general consensus out there. Ameya, I was going to say thanks for spending the time coming on, chatting with us. I know we covered a lot of ground here. I'm sure we did not exhaust all the questions or discussions that we could. Somebody might want to follow up with you and want to ask you a follow-up. What's a good way of connecting with you if somebody does have a follow-up question?
I'd say the best way is reaching out on LinkedIn. My profile is in the link. Please feel free to reach out. More than happy to connect, more than happy to have a conversation.
Okay. I will make sure to include that in case somebody does want to reach out to you. Again, thanks you for coming on. And that's it for this episode. Be back again. Different guest, different topic. And until then, two things. One, I thought this was a great conversation. Ameya kind of walked us through how the maturing conversation around Gen AI has changed. And I think if we were to have done an inspection of an episode 18 months ago, I think the conversations would be very different than what we were talking about now, because I think there's a lot more learnings that we're applying. So share this episode with somebody else who might benefit from it. I thought it was some great content. Also, like, subscribe, comment. Let me know how the show's going for you. Until next time, thank you and goodbye.